Thanks so much. Nice to see everybody. My name is Dr. Jordan Metzl. I'm a sports medicine doctor, physician here at Hospital for Special Surgery. I'm in New York City, and I am a devoted runner. This year I'll be doing marathon number, I think 37 or 38. I don't know, too many. I got a running problem. And in addition to being a big runner myself, I take care of a lot of athletes here in my office, all kinds. And I know many of you are coaches of all levels of runners, and really terrific job in keeping our young runners going, keeping them enthusiastic about running. My job today is to talk to you about some of the issues that we see in running and how you keep your athletes safely on the road. So I'm going to jump into some slides. If I forget, at the end, I've put my website, my social media, which is at Dr. Jordan Metzl. Please reach out with any questions. Hope you find this informative as I jump into a talk on running and running injury for our coaches. And I'm thrilled to help share this information with y'all. We're going to talk tonight about running medicine and the science of staying on the road and what that looks like for people, and how you guys can think about that for yourselves as you keep your runners healthy and moving along. All right, so what makes people healthy? It's a great question. And the answer is that, about 20% of health is determined by your genetics, who made you and who made them. About 20% of your health comes from interfacing with the medical system, and about 60% of health is lifestyle. So you may not be coaching the next Olympic athlete, you may not be coaching the next elite level runner, but definitely if you can get your kids and teenagers enthusiastic about moving and exercise and being part of a team and running, that's the biggest battle. So yes, I want you to make your runners as fast as possible, but I also want you to make sure you're thinking about, what am I doing? What are the lessons I'm giving so I keep this kid excited about being active, in college, and beyond college, when they're parents themselves, when they're grandparents. In my office, I take care of everybody from little kid runners to people in their 80s doing the marathon. And I think the commonality is they all love to move. And so I think your job in that discussion is how you think about making sure they're excited about moving as well. Now, my perspective is a little unique in that during the day, I work in this building right here, taking care of people's aches and pains all day long at a place called Hospital for Special Surgery, which is the world's biggest orthopedic hospital. And we have everything, all kinds of issues related to orthopedics. In my field of sports medicine, we see all kinds of athletes in all sports. But in the evenings and weekends, I do this on the right, which is I have a whole fitness community all about getting people active and moving and promoting exercise and prescribing exercise for my patients. And this is what this looks like on the right, and all ages. Now, I definitely want my patients to run because I think it's great medicine for them. We run a whole seminar for the second-year med students next door at Cornell Medical School, all about teaching people how to prescribe the exercise, the medicine of exercise, how you talk to your patients about exercise and about movement. And it's really important for doctors of the future to talk about things like, running, because, it used to be people come in and say, my shin hurts when I run, and they may be giving the advice, well, just stop running. Well, that's not very good advice, and it's bad medical advice. It's terrible for our patients. So I want my patients to run. I also know that physically active kids are less likely to be obese. They get higher grades in school. They're less likely to smoke and have risky behaviors. They're more likely to go to college, which means they're more likely to have successful jobs, which means they're better health, lower health costs, which means they're more productive at work, which means they have a reduced risk of heart disease, stroke, cancer, diabetes, which means that they basically make this circle. Active parents have active kids. And so this whole circle of activity, the circle of life around getting good behaviors is really important. Yet in America, we have the most overweight teenagers in the world. So we're overweight, we're lazy, we spend a lot of time sitting on the couch. And so all of you involved in getting kids out, moving around, you're doing a great job. Now, the other thing is that kids are unique in a lot of ways, but one of the main ways is that, 11 or 12 or 10 is very different. This is an AAU 10-year-old basketball team. And you can see at age 10, people have different sizes, they have different shapes, they have different levels of sexual maturity, which correlates to skeletal maturity, which correlates to physiologic capacity, which also correlates to psychological maturity. So when you're coaching adolescents, it's important to remember that they may not all take the same information at the same rate. They may be at different stages of their development. You have to be a good listener to people who are complaining of ongoing issues and make sure they get that checked out. The main point I want to make is that kids' bones are growing, and they grow through basically what are called growth plates. These are cartilage plates at the end of bones, and these are where bones get longer. When they're done growing, that turns into a solid piece of bone. Girls grow 2 years before boys on average, and they're done growing by about 13 or 14 in girls and about 15 or 16 in boys. But it's, again, person to person dependent. The reason I bring this up is that a shin splint in an adult may be something different in a kid. We see these growth plate injuries all the time in kids' ankles and their feet and their knees. And so I just want to make sure you're aware that if an adolescent runner or a kid runner is complaining of ache and a pain that doesn't go away, you have to get it checked out. And the advice I give all my patients of any age is that if pain is changing the way you move, you have to get that pain checked out. And that's important to know. Now, ASICS is, I'm so glad to be working with them, and a big proponent of what they talk about is the concept that a healthy mind and a healthy body, that mind and body go together. So we're going to talk about a little bit about running medicine tonight, and then we're going to talk about how we keep our patients on the road. So here's a typical patient in my office. Dr. Metzl, I'm doing an accelerated marathon program. I'm going to push through the pain. I don't care if it hurts. I can do this. And they come hobbling in with a nasty injury like this. This is a stress fracture in somebody's hip, which can totally change their activity profile for their entire life, for sure, if that hip goes on to crack. So why do people run? Why do you run? Why do you talk about running in your kids? Well, different reasons. Maybe they have a goal, they're running for a school, or they're running in memory of somebody, or to set a goal they never thought possible, or they want to be part of a group. I'll tell you, it's a lot easier in high school and in college when you have a cohort of people. When you get out, finding a squad that does activities, a community, really helps a lot. Now, ancient man ran to get food. So they weren't running 10Ks. They weren't running 5Ks. They weren't running collegiate or high school championships. They were trying to basically chase down prey. And when we evolved from hunter-gatherers who were getting seeds and nuts to people who were able to track down animals over time, the more calories resulted in basically evolutionarily bigger brains. We had more nutrition. And so there was a real evolutionary advantage to catch this. Now, this guy could run about maybe top speed 15 miles an hour for a short period of time. This guy can run 45 miles an hour, 50 miles an hour top speed for a short period of time. So how did this guy catch this? And the answer is that humans are built to run. There's been a lot of work on kind of people's capabilities. And the answer is that humans are uniquely built to be endurance athletes and uniquely built to build runners. And those are for a few reasons. They can really adapt to the environment. They can run in hot, they can run in cold. They mechanically have different bodies, different than other animals, to be able to run. And their endurance is incredible. So humans are amazing machines for running. Let's first talk about homeostasis. Homeostasis means they can keep their body temperature in a zone where they don't overheat. So we are the only primates without body fur. And so if you look at other animals that have body fur, when it gets hot outside, what happens to your dog? They run for a while. Like today here in New York City, it's quite hot. And I see a lot of dogs, being carried around the street panting because they can't cool their bodies. But we have the most sweat glands and no fur. So we can cool our bodies by sweating. So sweating allows basically the water on the skin to be evaporated, and that allows us to cool. We can cool uniquely well. So we can run races in really extreme environments, and the human body is capable of amazing things through different ways of dissipating heat. But the primary thing is sweating or evaporative cooling. Now, the other piece around us is biomechanically, we are built uniquely to run. This is Lucy, who is 3.2 million years old, discovered in a glacier in 1974. And when we look at the chimpanzee versus the human, we see different shaped pelvis, different shaped femur bone, and different shaped feet. And as we've evolved, our skeleton is uniquely able to push force through the medial part of the foot instead of through the lateral part of the foot. In addition, our pelvis is narrower at the bottom but broader at the top, different than the chimpanzee. If you see a chimpanzee walk down the hall, they waddle, but humans hopefully don't. And so the way our bone structure has evolved, we're quite able to load force. And then the other piece is the Achilles tendon. The Achilles tendon is one of the most important pieces of running and running mechanic. And that's because humans have an elongated Achilles tendon. This is an ape. Now, if you go to the zoo and the ape breaks free of his cage, he can run 40 miles an hour. He can chase you down very quickly. But if you run more than 100 meters, you can get away from the ape. Why is that? And a lot of that's due to this elongated Achilles tendon. So when humans run, this calf muscle contracts and relaxes, but the Achilles is like a spring which absorbs and releases the force of that contraction when the muscle gets shorter and longer. The ape has a very, very short Achilles tendon, so he has to use all this muscle, which tires quite quickly, but the humans get a rest with every single running stride, and so they can run, longer distances without getting tired. So all this leads to humans are great endurance runners. So there's a number of man versus horse races, and it gets again to this concept that horses are way faster than humans. They can run up to 55 miles an hour, but in certain hot, humid days, humans can outrun horses. And we've had different events over time where humans have raced horses dating back in this country to 1929, 1939. And there's a race in Montana now, man versus horse, still going every year. This is in England, the same thing, man versus horse. And you may think there's no way a human can beat a horse. But in fact, in some years, when the days are quite hot and humid, the human can run faster than the horse. So in this race, Florian ran faster than the horse Lucy because it was a very hot, humid day, and Lucy overheated and had to stop and walk, and Florian kept going because of his endurance capacity. So humans are built to run. Now, in the metric of health, you may hear a lot about 10,000 steps a day. Is that a magical number for your own health? And the answer is that it was basically a PR campaign from a Japanese pedometer company. In the 1964 Olympics, that company basically, Monpo K translated into 10,000 steps, but that doing lots of steps may be a little bit healthier for you, but there's not a magic formula with respect to 10,000 steps a day. We do know that runners live longer and they live healthier lives. So again, my focus for people is I want them to run forever. On average, people who run live about 6 years longer than other people. And that when you get older, people say you're going to don't run too much, you're going to get arthritis. And the answer is that's not true at all. There have been a number of studies looking at arthritis in runners, and runners have a much lessened risk of arthritis compared to people who don't run. So running is probably anti-inflammatory. It's great for your health. So keep prescribing that running, all of you coaches. What about running injury? What do we know about running injury? And the answer is that running is a constant battle between human and the ground, and that feet and ankles, hips and knees, muscles and cartilage, all of these things are part of the equation of keeping humans healthy and basically winning this war between man and the ground. What makes people get running injuries? And there's a number of different things. And so I'm going to walk you through some of those different things. First of all, there doesn't seem to be a difference in injury risk with respect to gender. We do know that people over 40 have a higher risk of Achilles injury. And we do know people who are bigger size have a slightly higher risk of injury, men versus women. We know that people who roll in a ton or pronate have a higher risk of developing shin splints. And that's an important thing. Not everybody who rolls in or pronates needs a shoe or an orthotic to correct them. But if one of your runners is getting a shin splint, we like to think about getting a shoe with some kind of control to basically bring them back into neutral as well. What about training? Well, definitely how you train your runners, be it adults or teen athletes, is associated with how people get hurt. So basically people that jump back into running after being off, or in the case of high school runners, people coming back after being relatively inactive for the summer, it's important to keep that base of training going so you don't get hurt. And that there's not a ton of evidence that running surface makes a difference. So if you're running on a track, if you're running on trail, if you're running on the road, there's not a ton of evidence that the surface makes a difference, but we do know that how you run, your stride and your mechanic makes a difference as well. Now, the other thing that's really important is how people have a history of injury in their past. So if somebody has a history of injury, that likely predisposes them to getting another injury. There's not a ton of evidence that changing shoes every 300 or 400 miles, for example, makes a difference. But that there may be evidence that getting an arch support, the right kind of support in your shoe, make a difference. Now, runners are putting a lot more loading force on their skeletons compared to walkers. And so, the problems that people have with how they run can be amplified when we study running. And so there have been a number of studies starting back in the 1800s to look at how people run and was there a best way to run? And the answer is that there's probably not a one size fits all for running. Some of the things that you can alter in your athletes include stride length, arm swing, side to side, their cadence, their foot mechanics. Those probably make a difference, but I would caution you about changing the way your runners naturally run. We see a number of problems with people trying to change their stride into a way they think they should run versus how their body naturally wants to run. But we do know that strong runners are hurt less often. So getting your runner started on a good strength program a couple times a week is a great thing to think about. We are just in the process of putting out a strength program with ASICS, and we'll be happy to share that with you at some point in the future, as well as recognizing injuries. When somebody gets hurt, kind of trying to figure out what their problem is and how you can help think about it. But, high school runner is different than adult runner is different than senior runners. Every population is a little bit different. Is there a best way to run? The answer is a lot of different ways to run. There's probably no single best way to run, but there's some definitely general trends that are helpful. So the things we can fix are kinetic chain strength, tip to toe strength. This is one of our strength training classes in Central Park. And we talk about strengthening for our runners all the time. Getting the right feet in the right shoes definitely makes a difference, particularly if somebody is struggling with injury, as well as making sure they're not overstriding. Keeping their stride length relatively short can help as well as a good coaching or training plan can make a difference as well. What about foot mechanics? Definitely associated with Achilles tendonitis and shin splints, as well as plantar fasciitis. But getting the right kind of shoe is important. I'm not a huge fan of the super cushion shoe. So some people do well with the very cushy shoes, but the answer is that people are excited about it in the running world. I'm not excited about it because what it does seem to do is affect the ground reactive force, meaning think about yourself running on the sand versus running on hard ground. If you run on the sand too much and you're not used to it, you often get different types of injuries. And we think the cushion shoes are probably something around that. And so this is a study looking at a 6-week transition to a cushion shoe from a control shoe. And they looked at basically ground reactive force between a cushion shoe and a traditional shoe after 6 weeks. And they found that basically if you were a roller, you rolled through more in the cushion shoe. So your flaws were accentuated in those super cushy shoes. So I'm not a big fan of that because we know that people who roll in too much tend to have problems with injury, and that's an important thing to think about. And that this is a study looking at runners running more than 20 miles a week. They had no injury, and we looked at only heel strikers, and we looked at how they hit the ground and what some of the issues around their injuries were. And so these are the rear foot strikers, the midfoot strikers, and the forefoot strikers. This is how hard they hit the ground. And the rear foot strikers have a typical spike here when they hit the ground with their heel versus the midfoot and the forefoot. And in the lab, we actually measure this. Forefoot strikers, midfoot strikers, and hindfoot strikers or rear foot strikers. And that we found is that basically there's not a perfect answer. There's not a perfect answer to how you hit the ground and what your risk of injury is. So when it comes to injury, we caution people not to change the way your runners are running unless they're having a problem. Finally, I want to talk about strength training. So strong muscles is key. And I think many high school and college coaches are now on the bandwagon of strength training for their runners. And we're big fans of that for reducing injury risk. We're big fans of plyometric-based training, which seems to really help. This is one of our classes in Central Park this past winter, working on walking lunges, which people hate when they're doing them up the hill, but they really work. So how do we put it all together for our patient? Basically, we want to get a quick diagnosis of her hip pain. We want to figure out why she had an injury. We want to think about our feet. We want to think about our stride. We want to think about our training. We want to think about our nutrition. We want to think about, what that injury is doing to hurt. So to conclude, our high school runners, I want to thank our awesome coaches for keeping everybody running. The medical community wants to keep everybody running. And we want to keep thinking about research in the future as we go forward. I'm going to leave you with my website. On our site, we have a whole host of videos that you can download and watch. Everything is free. Every single injury somebody will run into, you can register for our site. We have all kinds of current programs, both in person and virtual. And our social media, mostly Instagram, also Twitter under Dr. Jordan Metzl. We have updates on what we're doing. Then our book on running I did is one of the books I did in our series, all about how to basically keep people running. I hope you find helpful as a resource as well. So with that, I want to thank you for your attention, and I'll turn it back over for any questions. Thank you very much.